In the previous tutorial, we laid out our chords application, which is going to be a React application to work with chord chart notation. And in this tutorial, we're going to start building our first React components. We're going to learn a little bit about how components work and how we can compose components with one another. And then we are, by the end of this tutorial, going to be reading in the chord notation that's in plain text and rendering out a table that isn't formatted in such a way that the text looks good. So before we get started, we're going to need a library to do this, and that's going to be ChordSheet.js. And what this allows us to do is read in a chord chart in the normal ChordPro notation, and we can then output that in a couple different ways. And the way that's going to be interesting to us is when we use an HTML parser, or text formatter, sorry. And this will output an HTML table that we can then put into our page using React, and we can actually update this on the fly while we're typing. So let's install this now. If you come over here and we use npm install ChordSheet.js, and then we say -- save, this will go off and fetch the source for us, and it'll update our package.json for us. And then we'll be able to reference ChordSheet.js in an import statement when we actually need to use this within a component. As of right now, everything we have is really within our application or our app component. So we're going to make modifications to that. And the way we're going to do this today is we're going to go make the changes that we want to see, and then we'll implement the things that'll kind of make that happen. So we're going to actually break the application for a little while. So if we open up source app.js, we can take a look in here, and we just had this hello world tag right here, but we're going to add a little bit more than that. We're going to use 3 different components in here to make the layout of our page, and then one of those components is going to be kind of the big important component that's going to be handling our parsing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start out with our import statements. So we'll do import header. And we're going to use components to actually lay out the structure, because there could be dynamic portions of our application that need to be in just the header or just the footer. So for right now, we're going to actually do all of our markup inside of JSX. Later on, you could separate this out and have like a partial portion of the page that is an actual React application, and then some like the rest of it could be static, for instance. But we're going to import header from, and then we're going to use a partial path. And this is going to go from the components header with a capital H, just to be consistent. And then we're going to copy this line and paste it a couple times. So for header here, we're going to say footer. And then on this line for header, we're going to say header. This is going to be Chord Editor. Okay, now going down into our render function, we're going to need to change some things up. So we need a div. We're going to give this the class name of wrapper. And if you remember from last time, we ran into the thing where you have to only return one element. So if you want to work with multiple subcomponents in a component, you need to wrap that all in something else. So that's where this wrapper div is coming into place. And then we're going to use our header component. And I don't think I really mentioned this in our previous tutorial, but we reference our own components within JSX, acting like they're a tag, for instance. So whatever the component's name is, in this case, it's header with capital H, then we can just put it in normal tag notation using greater than and less than. And then it is important that we make sure we close this, because every tag needs to be closed. So in this case, we're not using something that has an actual like closing tag like that. So we need to make it self-closing. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a workspace, which this is going to be where our editor is at. And then down at the bottom here, we're going to put a footer. And then inside of workspace, we will add our chord editor. And that's about it. This is all our app needs right now. So we're gonna reference our 3 subcomponents that we have yet to create and go from there. So the next thing that we're going to need to do is, if we look at the partial path up here on line 2 and 3 and 4, that we have a components directory that we think needs to exist, just because I think that's a good structure. So let's save this file, and then we need to make a directory in source components. And then from here, we'll go and we'll actually edit our files. So let's go ahead and touch these just so we have the files there. We'll do header, footer, chord editor. And if I've never shown this before, the notation that I just did right here with the squiggly brackets just lets me write multiple things that will then all get broken into their own thing. So if you looked at this command, everything in between these commas and in between these brackets would turn into header.js, footer.js, chordeditor.js, and it would essentially do the same command with all three of those outputs. This would expand itself. So we'll get started with the easy ones. So we'll work with the header and the footer first. Let's do the header for right now. And in here, we're going to import React because we need this in order to render out JSX. We need component again. And this is from React. And this is going to be exactly like our app was before. So this is class header, extends component. And then we have a render function that's going to return. And then in here, we're going to actually create a normal HTML5 header tag. And inside of there, we'll just make a title. So we'll call chords. And then we need to export default header. Okay. So that's not too shabby. This is just the basic hello world essentially from our previous application or from the previous tutorial because it doesn't do anything that's dynamic. So let's copy this and then we'll open up source components footer.js. Paste this in here. We'll replace header with footer. And then down here, we'll do the same thing, actually, header, footer. But we're going to do some dynamic stuff in here. This is kind of a petty thing, but it's just so we can kind of get our feet wet with actually doing things inside of our components. And so we'll create a UL of class name. This will just be site links. There aren't really going to be any links right now, but we'll get there eventually. And then inside of here, we're going to have an LI. And this is going to be our copyright thing. So, you know, where you see the copyright symbol, whatever the business name is, and then the year. So for us, that's ampersand copy. And then inside of squiggly brackets here, we can actually execute code. So we'll say this.state.year. And this will make sense here in a second. And then CoderJourney. So this will, by the time it's all rendered out, you'll see the copyright logo, the year, which is 2017, CoderJourney. And what this state.year is this, in this context, is the component itself. State is where we're going to actually be working with the state of the component. So the way React works is it's a view layer that takes some sort of state at the top and renders it. And then when you want to update your actual component, what actually happens is you modify the state and then it will just re-render itself. It's smart about it. It goes through and does some pretty heavy computer science-y kind of things in order to figure out what it needs to change and what it doesn't, using something called the shadow DOM. But yeah, this is more or less what we're going to be working with when we want to have something that's kind of dynamic. This isn't really dynamic because it's going to change once a year, but it's a way that we can actually modify this stuff. But right now, state doesn't exist, so this won't work out for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another method onto our component here. So we have constructor, and this is going to take a thing called props, and constructor is the initialization method for our component. So the component that we're extending already has this defined, so we're going to call super props just to make sure we don't mess anything up. And then we are going to set this.state equal to a hash that has a year that then inside of here has a new date dot get full year. Okay, we're not going to be able to see this in action just yet because we need to create our chord editor. So maybe we'll go create an empty chord editor component for right now, just so that we can actually render things. And then we'll go take a look at this in the browser. So let's open that up. So it'll be in source components chord editor.js. And in here, well, actually, let's copy this stuff. Come into here and replace footer with chord editor. And then we'll just put something in here like editor just for the time being. Okay, so now in a different tab, let's make sure to go and start this. Okay, so first thing is I still have styles on unordered lists. They still have bullets, so this isn't quite working out for us. But we do have our 2017 here, and I don't know if I have it installed right now, but I should have told you guys about this in the previous tutorial, is that there is a React Chrome extension. So if you go and take a look, you can get the React developer tools, and you should definitely be adding these to your browser of choice. So we'll install those, and we'll come back and refresh our page. And with any luck, we should be able to take a look at the tab here, and there will be a new one that says React. So this is really neat. So it'll actually show you the components that you have rendered on the page. We have an app right here. We have a header component, Chord Editor, and footer. And if we look at this, you can actually click on footer and you can see that the state is 2017. And we can change this. So we can say it's 2016. And when we hit enter there, you'll notice that over here, it modified itself because it's all dependent on the state. So if the state changes, then React will automatically re-render the view. So definitely go and install the React developer tools. Really, really handy. Now back to actually building our Chord Editor here. Inside of the Chord Editor, we're going to need to import something else. So we need to import ChordSheet.js. And this will be from ChordSheet.js. Okay, we're going to also have a constructor here. So we'll say constructor, props. We need to do the super thing again. And then the stuff that we're going to set up in here is we're going to do this. We'll call this handle change, which is going to be a function that we'll define here in a second. And then this handle change.bind this. And this is a really annoying thing in JavaScript sometimes because the word this can mean different things depending on quite a few different situations. But what we're doing here with this binding means that within the handle change function that we're going to define, or method, sorry, that if we ever call this, we mean for it to be the actual component itself. So what we're doing is we're overriding this, and this can't be reset by any sort of context. So we're saying that in our handle change function, which is going to take an event and do some stuff, that anytime we say this inside of this method, we mean the Chord Editor component itself, not the event that's being passed in. So that's what we're doing right here. Next thing we need to do is we need to set up our state. Whoops, this dot state. And this is going to be a hash again. And we're going to use this for a placeholder value, which is just, this is actually going to be the text of our text box that people can enter things into. So this will just be what it starts as, and then we will update this progressively as we keep going. So handle change is going to actually do this dot set state, which this essentially does what we just did inside of the developer console and changes the state of the actual component. And this will be a new hash with a value of E, which is the event that's being passed in, target value. And on this particular one, we're going to set this up on the onChange event of a text field. So every time we type in the text field, it's going to fire this event, trigger handle change, and then we're going to set the state of our component to the content of the actual text field. We're not quite done yet. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to call this get chord markup. And for this is a method that we're going to use in order to take the value up here is going to be the raw ChordPro notation that somebody's writing, or eventually it'll be not ChordPro, but that's just how we're going to store it behind the scenes. But this is the plain text version. And then this get chord markup is going to take the value and it's going to go through and it's going to parse it. And then it's also going to format it into HTML. So we're going to need a few different things here. We're going to need a formatter, which is going to be a new ChordSheet.js HTML formatter. We're going to need a parser, which is a ChordSheet.js ChordPro parser. And then lastly, we're going to need our song, this is the output. So will be the final thing. So this will be parser. Well, this is actually the input. This will be parser.parse this state value. So this is us taking our handle change reset state of value. So this is the current ChordPro notation and creating it as a chord sheet in ChordSheet.js land. And then what we want to return from this is a hash that has kind of a weird thing here, but it's a _HTML. And this will take formatter.format song. And what this is allowing us to do is return raw HTML from this particular method, and then we're going to consume it in the actual JSX of our component. So every time that a change is made, it's going to call get chord markup essentially, and that's going to then pump in some new HTML. And you might be asking, okay, why are you creating a new formatter and parser every time? Why don't you just do this once and say in the constructor up top and then just use that? And that's because it maintains state when you do it that way. So what would end up happening is every time we would make a letter change, it would double the output, if that makes sense. So now it's time for us to actually come down here and write the template. So we're going to do another div. It's going to have the class name of Chord Editor. And then inside of here, we're going to have two different things. We're going to have two panels that somebody's going to be working with. So we'll have one panel here. This will be our one for text editor. And then we'll have another one that is going to be the actual like formatted output that we're going to be working with. So the first one we're going to work with here is going to have an H3, and we're going to call this input. Probably change this wording later on as this gets to be something that normal people are going to use. And then it's going to have a text area in it. And in here, we're going to have a few things. We're going to have a style setting here, and we're going to use squiggly brackets again so that we can write an actual JavaScript snippet in here. And then we're actually going to write a hash that represents the styles we want to change. So we want to set some width to be 100%. And the height to be 100%. And then JSX will figure this out and actually turn this into CSS notation for us. Next up, we're going to have an onChange event. And this is going to do this.handleChange. So we're passing it the raw method from on our component to be the thing that is triggered every time this is changed. And then our default value is going to be this.state.value. And then we have to close this tag. Now we're working our way into this other panel. It's going to have an H3 of output. And then in here, we want a div. It's going to have some styles on it too. It'll have width of 100%, height of 100%, and font family monospace. And this is just because the way chord notation works is you kind of want to put the chord above the actual spot that it starts. And it would be really annoying if those didn't line up exactly. So you'll put it on a character or on the start of a syllable inside of a word, and you want the chord to line up at exactly the right spot. So monospace fonts are really where it's at for that particular kind of thing. We're going to give this a class name of chord output. And then this is a custom thing in... man, I can't type. Dangerously set inner HTML. And this will be this.getChordMarkup. And then we're actually going to call that function instead of just passing it in the raw function. But let's make sure we spelled that right. So dangerously set inner HTML. This is something that React provides us in order to set raw HTML, essentially. So now we have our input and output divs. So if we save this, let's see what happens. Over here, we have an error. Oh, I put a semicolon because I was writing CSS. So we'll save that. Take a look. Okay, it compiled successfully. If we bounce back over here, you'll notice that I can make changes here and they're going to show up down there. And so ChordPro notation takes square brackets and then the name of a chord. So let's say like just the A major chord, So you put that in the square brackets, and then you would put the text that it's going to be, and it's going to put that underneath. So this is and then we'll say this is going to be a B minor, new song. So it's actually outputting it in a way that this is how people would read chord notation. So it doesn't look like anything too fancy right now, but this is going to be really handy for people eventually to be able to write some sort of text and on the fly have it turn into this. My wife was creating a chord chart just yesterday using Pages, and it was amazingly tedious for her to end up lining everything up that she needed to. So she was really hoping I was going to have this project done, but not quite yet. So this doesn't look great though. So we're going to close this. We don't really need it. And we're going to just apply some styles in order to make this look. We want these to be side by side. So we want input to be on one side and output to kind of take up the other half. And we obviously want to remove this dot from our unordered list down there. So for this, eventually we're going to have some style sheets in here and actually do this probably using something like Sass and have that be compiled as part of our npm start like watch process. But for now, what we're actually going to do is we're going to come back over here and we're going to open up public index.html. And then we will actually just come in here and create a style tag because we don't need that many styles for right now. We just want to make this not look completely horrible. So we'll say body HTML and the root. Need these to have some height and width. We just want these to fill themselves out. And then we don't want any margin, don't want any padding. And then from here, we need the chord editor. It's going to be kind of the big one because it's the only real complicated bit. And this is going to be display flex to use flexbox. We're going to say flex direction of row so that things flow side to side instead of top and bottom. And then we want this to have a min height of 50% of the view height. And then within that, we're going to have a panel that's going to be flex 1. This just allows it to grow. Margin of 5 pixels, display flex itself so that we can flex the contents inside of the panel. And this is going to have the flex direction of column. Next, we're going to have our chord output. Just going to have no padding on it because that's kind of annoying. Oh, no, I'm thinking border spacing. Here we go. Border spacing of 0. And then border collapse of collapse. We'll actually tie into the chord output TD also. This will have no padding. And the reason for this is you might not have noticed it, but there's some extra space in between words when you actually add a chord to something. And that's because it puts just a little bit of extra padding when it has to break those into different columns in the table. And lastly, we're going to do chord output table and give this margin of 10 pixels 0. And actually, I lied. That's not last because we have one more thing, and that is we want to come up here and set the UL list style to none. All right, come back over, take a look. There we go. So now we have our copyright stuff down at the bottom, and our inputs and outputs are a little bit more wide here. So we can put in our notation. So hopefully this wasn't too much of a whirlwind, but we went through and let's take a look at what we did. We created some more custom components. So app.js actually is utilizing our own components now. It's not just a hello world. The header's nothing special. The footer got us to see a little bit of how the state was going to work out and to actually work on the constructor method. And then the chord editor kind of did the same thing, but it allowed us to add some extra things too. So we saw how we can add arbitrary methods onto our component and then utilize those inside of event handling code inside of our components JSX. So we actually have a functioning application right now. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but we're definitely going to make some good progress with it in the coming weeks. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, be sure to leave a comment down below telling me why you liked it and what you're going to do with this knowledge. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can get more of these tutorials each week. And also don't forget to join us on Patreon, Facebook, Slack, so you can keep the chat going, and on Twitter. But as always, have a nice week.